Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us on the show are Charlotte Duncker, football reporter for The Times, and Jason Burt, the chief football correspondent from The Telegraph. Welcome to you both. Let's quickly run through the Back Pages. This is The Guardian. I always prefer the facts. Cryptic Arteta hits back at claims that Arsenal used the dark arts. Slot special Alexander-Arnold can be better. Captain Brook reigns for England in the cricket. Carabao Cup, Manchester City, Chelsea and Villa ease into round 4. The Eye has Newcastle United saying that Howe holds peace talks with Mitchell. Smiles all round. City bare their teeth against Hornets to go through in Carabao Cup. Brook brilliance the cricket again. Ben's back, question mark, Stokes, what Everton fans might expect from new owners. The Sun, Sin City, Mick Pep's a lot of dark arts kings, I know. What's up, Doc? Jeremy Goal, that's Jeremy Doku. Goal, but bad news on Rodri injury. In the Mirror, I know City's tricks, Arteta again, and the dark arts conversation. Fox is out of a hole. Leicester, the three League Cup winners are 3 times League Cup winners are through. ETH makes a new dig at Redknapp. Toon's £15,000 gift to help Don's pitch, and Aussies caned by Harry Brook, that is. Okay, let's start with Mikel Arteta and the supposed dark arts following Arsenal's draw with Manchester City on Sunday. Charlotte, The Guardian, I always prefer the facts. Cryptic Arteta hits back on claims that Arsenal used the, quote, dark arts. David Heitner with this piece, but all across the press. What did you make of Mikel Arteta's comments in the press conference and his tone? Was it emotional or was it very targeted in how he came across?
I think one of the points he makes is on the back pages of one of the other papers is he learned everything he knows from being under Pep Guardiola at Manchester City. And I think if you go back to quotes that Rodri made in 2019 when he first signed for Manchester City, he said he was taught the art of tactical fouling by Pep Guardiola. So I think everyone knows where Arteta has learned his tactics from. I think me and Jason were both at the game on Sunday. I think we all expected to see what Arsenal did in the second half. They were 10 men against Manchester City at the Etihad. They needed to gain every bit of advantage they could get. That meant staying down for as long as they did or delaying the restart. Then really, who can blame them? The players that deemed to broke the rules were booked for time wasting. So they were acting within the parameters of the rules that were set out. So if people have a problem with it, then maybe that's something that they're going to have to change in the rules. But I just thought it was all part of Arsenal's game plan and they executed it to perfection. Not that many people liked it.
No, almost got the equaliser in the end, didn't they? City, I suppose, but it seems Arsenal's victory for many people. Some back page, Jason, Sin City, Gunners boss keeps feud bubbling. Mick Pep's a lot of dark arts kings, I know. John West reporting, and Mikel Arteta pointing out he was there for 4 years. I don't think it was quite 4 years, Jason. But what do you make of him just lifting the lid on Pep Guardiola at City as well? This could be an interesting rivalry for some time to come if Pep stays on at City.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the point. I mean, it's obviously Tuesday night now. We're talking about a game that took place on Sunday afternoon. The fact that it's still dominating the news agenda and it will be 3 days afterwards just shows now we're now seeing an epic rivalry beginning to develop between these two clubs, and possibly also, and an interesting new aspect of that is between these two managers, because up until this point they've been very, very respectful of each other. We even saw on Sunday they were hugging. There was no animosity between those two. When everything else was kicking off around them and various sort of, chaos ensued, they were obviously very calm and towards each other. But now we've seen Arteta kind of make it personal. He's saying that he learned from Guardiola how to behave in this manner, that obviously that the dark arts is a thing that's got underneath his skin. We're talking about tactical fouling, and he says he's got all the information about that, which in itself is quite an interesting comment, because it begs the question, well, come on then, share this information. What sort of special dossier have you got of information that you have compiled on Manchester City and Pep Guardiola? But I think, the point is, it is now developing into quite an epic rivalry, which could be between the two managers and not just the two clubs. There's not an awful lot of love lost between Manchester City and Arsenal. And I think some of the reporting of the last couple of days has got under the skin of both clubs. So it's been quite interesting how they've reacted to it.
Yeah, covered in the Times as well. Charlotte, defiant Arteta hits back at City. Jason making the point that it's 48 hours old, but still dominating the back pages. How do you assess it? Jason's saying there that they seem pretty affectionate on Sunday. Do you think there is now a kind of rivalry and a slight bitterness between the pairs? Or do you think it's maybe for our benefit, the press conferences?
Yeah, I think maybe it is a bit more for the media benefit. Arteta and Guardiola both came into their post-match press conferences, and while there was little digs about the way the teams played, they were only complimentary about each other, waxing lyrical about how great they played. I think Guardiola said this is one of the best teams he's seen in Europe, and then Arteta walked in and repaid the compliment and said, "Oh no, Manchester City are the best team." It all seemed very pally and very chummy. So I'm sure there's no love lost between them. But Jason's right in terms of, I think we're finally seeing this rivalry now on a level maybe that we saw between Manchester City and Liverpool for so many years. It's been lacking that bit of needle for the last few years, really, hasn't it? Manchester City have been on top and Arsenal have kind of gone close, but there didn't seem to be that much bitterness or rivalry between them. But this game has definitely stoked that fire. And I think when we see the return leg at the Emirates later in the season, it'll be really interesting to see. There's lots of personal vendettas going against that, especially after all the post-match comments with the players. Just to see how that plays out then, it's going to make it more spicy and a lot more interesting.
Certainly is. And the grand analysis, Jason, as well. We've been comparing Arteta and Pep for some years now, haven't we? The expectation was that the style of football would be similar under Arteta at Arsenal, but perhaps not. The Mirror has the headline, "I know City's tricks." Mikel says he worked at Etihad, claims he has, quote, "all the info on the methods." But the style of play, it's almost throwback to George Graham's Arsenal, isn't it, at times, rather than Pep Guardiola's City?
Yeah, I think sometimes we're expecting to see Tony Adams with his arms in the air on Sunday afternoon. But no, you're absolutely right. I think the defensive rearguard from Arsenal was incredible, actually. Incredible discipline, incredible organisation, very laudable in the way they went about it. But you're absolutely correct in saying that we kind of thought that, Arteta would be a sort of a Guardiola disciple and that's it. But actually, no, he's looking more like a mix of that. But also, I think to an extent, David Moyes. Obviously, he played under David Moyes at Everton. Yeah. I think he's probably learned quite a lot from David Moyes as a manager, and a little bit of Jose Mourinho as well. We see a little bit of that in the way that Arsenal are behaving, some of the tricks that they've used. They've pushed the boundaries, as City have, as all winning teams do, to an extent. And as you say, obviously, George Graham as well in the tradition of Arsenal. So I think he's proving to be his own man. I think he's managing the situation on the field really well. He's obviously had the problem of losing Martin Odegaard, and that's made him have to sort of adapt a little bit. And it's been an incredibly difficult week for Arsenal last week. I mean, they came through Tottenham Hotspur, they came through Atalanta away and Manchester City and didn't lose any of those games. So I think they've managed that situation very, very well. And I think the fact that they've stoked up this rivalry so much by going to the Etihad and almost winning, makes it again, another dimension to this Premier League title race, because clearly they're getting closer and closer to being champions themselves. And whether or not Manchester City can hold them off this season will be fascinating. But I just want to reiterate one point. What's interesting to me is we talk about the rivalry between City and Liverpool and Klopp and Guardiola. It didn't get personal. I think Arteta slightly now today made it a little bit more personal. And what will be fascinating to me is whether or not Guardiola bites on that or whether or not he doesn't. And it's not his style to bite, but occasionally he does. And it'd be quite interesting to see how he comes back on it now.
Indeed, adds a little bit extra spice. And you mentioned Liverpool as well. Goff, there could be in the title race as well. Perhaps they'll benefit from the feud. We shall see. Charlotte, I wanted to mention Manchester City winning, of course, against Watford of the Championship and the League Cup. The eye covering it, smiles all round. Looks a bit of a forced one from Rico Lewis on Mateus Nunes there. City bare their teeth against Hornets to go through in Carabao Cup. Was it important they got a win off the back of the weekend? We know it's been a pretty perfect season to this point, but just to keep the momentum going?
Yeah, so soon after that game as well. They obviously played late on Sunday, and to be playing on Tuesday, it's a tight turnaround, but as we expected, lots of changes for City. I think Guardiola came out afterwards and said he was happy, but some players could have done better. So to go through to the next round, get some minutes in the legs of those fringe players there, and test, especially in terms of Nunes scoring his first goal for the club, can only breed confidence throughout those fringe players that Guardiola might be forced to call on in the coming weeks with such a hectic schedule. So I think we all expected them to beat Watford tonight. They went and did that, and they did it quite straightforward without any fresh injuries, and obviously with some minutes in the legs of some players who really needed it.
Indeed, Caden Braithwaite as well, making his debut at the age of 16, born in the same year as Kyle Walker started as a professional. They're coming through the ranks thick and fast at City, but have they got anyone to replace Rodri, Charlotte? I'll stay with you because your piece in the Times poses just that question. How will Man City cope with loss of their linchpin? What do you think? Will they be able to cope?
It's such a tough one, isn't it? Because if you look at the record when he's in the team, when he's out of it, it's undeniable the impact that he's had. He's been their best player now for 2 or 3 years. He's tipped to win the Ballon d'Or. Guardiola's even said himself that he's irreplaceable. I was looking at comparing his stats with the players that could potentially replace him. You've got Kovacic, you've got Stones who could drop into that midfield role. Lewis, who you just saw in that picture, is really versatile. He can definitely invert into midfield. And obviously, they got Ilkay Gundogan back this summer, so he can definitely play a role there. But none of their statistics in terms of the ball carries, the way they attack duels, the way they win duels, the way they break up the play, everything Manchester City do well, Rodri is at the heart of it. So I think none of them are a perfect match for him. None of them are like for like in terms of replacing him in that team. Maybe we'll see Guardiola tweak the system a bit and play with 2 holding midfielders, which we don't see too often. But I think one of the points to make is that obviously last season when they missed him, I think they missed him for 4 games and they lost 3 of those. And the other one that they won was against Luton. And this season, we've not seen him start until the game against Arsenal, and Manchester City have managed to win those games. So maybe they are finding a way, and it's not as scary as it seemed in the past in terms of Rodri's out. This is a disaster because his record is so good. He's lost 1 game in 18 months that he's been involved in for club and country. His record is absolutely phenomenal. So he's going to be a huge loss for them. But if you look at what Guardiola's so good at, when he loses key players within his squad, he's good at tweaking the system. He's good at finding other ways to win. He's really, that is why he's such a good manager. So I have no doubt that they will be able to find a way around it, but it is a massive, massive blow for them.
It is certainly. Wait for that definitive diagnosis as well. Rumours abound it'll be a long time. We'll see. Pep Guardiola saying it's probably a while, but no verdict as yet, Jason. When you talk about that, Charlotte mentions all the defensive statistics, but when you look at Rodri, as part of the problem with adjusting the system, you need to replace many facets of his game, and not one player can do that because he's become a bit of a goal scorer at times as well, hasn't he, from that deep line position?
Yeah, and I think as Charlotte says, he is almost irreplaceable, really. I mean, I think he is arguably their most important player. I mean, Erling Haaland also has a shout for that as well. If Haaland got injured, it'd be very difficult to replace him. But I think he makes Manchester City tick. You know, he makes everything work for them. He gives them everything in terms of the defensive qualities. But as you say, also he has a goal threat. He has a physicality about him. I think on Sunday when he went off, they lost a little bit of a physical edge as well and look more vulnerable at set pieces. I think he brings that to them. And obviously he's got that calming influence and experience of being such a high quality player that almost his presence on the pitch makes a difference to those Manchester City players, even though they are world-class and brilliant players themselves. I think he is irreplaceable, and it will be fascinating to see how City go about it. But as Charlotte said, if there's one manager who can do that, who can find a different system, who can win a league without a striker, as he did a few years ago, with a false 9, it is Pep Guardiola. He will find a solution to this, but no doubt it's a huge blow to him, considering all the ambitions that City have got this season. He is the one player he really, really did not want to lose.
Welcome back. You're watching Back Pages tonight, and it's welcome back to the Times. It's Charlotte Duncker and the Telegraph's Jason Burt. Jason, I'll come to you to discuss a piece by Jim White in the Telegraph. Telegraph got a couple of interesting pieces on Ten Hag and FC20 as he goes up against his boyhood team, a team he played for 3 times in his career in different eras. The line by Jim's piece: Ten Hag wanted his way at FC20 even as a know-it-all youth. And this 3 players, 3 pictures of different stages of Ten Hag's playing days there. What do you glean from this piece as well? A very sure-headed person. Is that what comes through? Sure of his ways and his opinions?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's, as you mentioned, there's a couple of pieces we've done on Ten Hag, and they both have similar threads in them. My colleague Sam Wallace has also done an interview with Stephen McLaren, and he talks about basically the kind of fierce determination that Ten Hag has to succeed, but also to do it his way. And that's obviously, that means too stereotypical, a very Dutch trait. We see that with lots of Dutch coaches and players and so on, Louis van Gaal and people like that. But certainly at FC20, he made a huge impression there as a player, but also in terms of what he did in terms of the coaching. and the kind of identity he helped create at the club, which is still enduring to this day. He's a real local hero in terms of the way they regard him at 20. But I think there we saw some of the characteristics that we've seen at Manchester United, that kind of quite custard determination that even in the face of perhaps adversity or people questioning him or asking questions about his future, and we obviously knew he may well have gone in the summer. He was determined to stay, and he's determined to fight it out, and determined to see it through, and determined to tell us that he's getting it right, and that he's the second most successful manager in the Premier League after Pep Guardiola at the moment, and won trophies and so on and so forth. So he's come out fighting, and I think that's always been a characteristic of him throughout his career. There's one other line I'd mentioned that Steve McLaren says to my colleague Sam, and he talks about how actually Ten Hag was right to get rid of Ronaldo because Ronaldo didn't want to run. And I thought that jumps out as a line in the piece as well. And obviously a sign that Ten Hag isn't going to have a player, however big a name he is, however big a reputation he has, not doing things his way. And we've seen that obviously with Jadon Sancho and various other players. So to be fair to Ten Hag, whether or not he survives and thrives and succeeds as the Manchester United manager, he certainly wants to do it his way. And to an extent, we admire that. He's determined to be his own man.
Indeed, Steve McLaren not really praising or criticising him for that, but saying he's very consistent, which is important as a manager in terms of your approach. United told to go for the kill in the Express, just on the left-hand side of their back page, pictured David McDonnell reporting here. How important is this game against FC20, Charlotte? Because it's probably an emotional one for Ten Hag, but I suppose in the here and now, is a win vital?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really emotional one. I think there's a nice quote from him where he said he'd have preferred to have played someone else because it's not nice to hurt someone that you love. I think that's what he said in his press conference. So that's him assuming that Manchester United are going to go out and win tomorrow at Old Trafford. But we saw what they did in the Carabao Cup last week in terms of scoring 7, but we've not really seen them hit those heights yet in the Premier League. They're really struggling still for goals there. And we know that they finished joint lowest scorers in the Premier League, top 10 last season. So if they can go tomorrow and just win convincingly and get more goals, then I think maybe that could help them breed confidence in the league and maybe get them back to scoring those goals that they really have been lacking in the league, not this season, but the season before.
Absolutely. Goals in the League Cup wasn't there last week, but trying to convert those chances seems to be key. Mirror back page. Let's just take that in quickly regarding Erik Ten Hag. Again, right-hand side of the back page, you can see Ten Hag pictured. ETH makes new dig at Redknapp. Erik Ten Hag reignited his war of words with Jamie Redknapp for speculating about the quote-unquote real reason the Manchester United boss dropped Marcus Rashford. What do you make of this stuff, Jason? Is this journalists being sort of agent provocateurs, or do you think Ten Hag worries too much about what people think and trying to be right regarding our previous conversation?
Journalists being agent provocateurs or pundits being agent provocateurs?
Well, possibly both. I mean, the pundit and then the journalist asked the question, maybe?
I think it's fair to ask the question because obviously Jamie Redknapp raised an issue. Marcus Rashford was left out of the team against Palace, and rightly so. Jamie's got every right to discuss that. But arguably, he went too far. You could say he speculated quite a lot on the reasons why. He said something like, "We may find out, we may not find out why Marcus Rashford was left out." Now, obviously, Ten Hag then has absolutely every right to come back at that and say, "Look, it was definitely a rotation issue. That's why I've put him on the bench and he came on later in the game." So I think the manager's right to fight his corner. I think the pundit is right to raise the issue, although arguably, as I say, Jamie might have gone too far in this case. And I think the journalist is then right to clarify and ask the question. So I think it's an interesting story. It goes to the heart of a lot of punditry, I think. I think there's an awful lot of speculation, if I'm being honest, that comes across on TV sometimes, which a lot of it is not very well informed. And the people talk about their opinions as if they are fact. And I think sometimes, the managers are right to pick them up on that.
Interesting. Well, long may the debates continue. Let's stick with you, Jason, because you've done a piece a little bit further down in the Championship with Ed Waldron, who's head of football operations at the tender age of 29 at Oxford United. How to build a team by Oxford's 29-year-old transfer supremo. What did you learn about this? Sounds stressful, doesn't it? And a lot of mobile phone use.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number of WhatsApp messages and phone calls and time spent on the phone is quite fascinating. But the idea behind the piece really was because we talk an awful lot and we write an awful lot about transfers and players on the move and so on and so forth. But I wanted to talk to somebody about actually how do you do this? What do you do? What are the processes involved? How much do you use data? How much do you use scouting? How many phone calls do you make? How many background checks do you do? And Ed was extremely sort of forthcoming in talking about the different methods that they use, which I think obviously are similar to other clubs. For example, it's interesting to me that it's very rare now for a player to be signed by any club without him being interviewed. Clubs want to talk to the players first. They want to look him in the eye, see if he really wants to come, have a proper discussion with him about it. I think years ago that didn't happen. I think now they're thinking these are big investments and they want to make sure the player definitely wants to come. I think background checks is another big area now. I think there's an awful lot of phone calls put into former teammates, former managers, former head of director of football, to talk about players, the character, whether or not they'd fit in, if they're the right sort of personality. And then obviously the data is quite interesting as well. They compile huge amounts of data on players, looking at different factors as to why they should come and what they do and what attributes they have. So you put all these information together, and Ed said to me, they started off with a list of 300 players and they bolted down and they then eventually signed 16. I think some clubs even have 3,000 players, not 300. So anyway, my point of view, is quite a fascinating topic.
It's a good read as well, complicated, very rigorous approach as recruitment should be, I suppose. Quickly, let's finish with your favourite dark arts team. We've got about 30 seconds, Jason. In the Telegraph, we've got Surrey cricket team, Atletico Madrid mentioned, all kinds of opinions there. What have you got for that? We've got Charlotte coming, so give us your dirtiest team in 5 seconds.
Wimbledon from the 1980s, I did not like them at all. I thought that was anti-football.
Charlotte, dark arts team, what do you think, the nastiest team, dirtiest team?
I've agreed with Chris Bascom in terms of Atletico Madrid. They're managed by Diego Simeone, the master of the dark arts.
Yeah, in the image of the manager himself. Charlotte, Jason, thank you very much. Great show. And if you missed any of it, another chance to see Back Pages tonight at 1:30. And it's also available as a podcast. Just download Back Pages on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Busy night on Wednesday. United in action again, as we've mentioned. Our guests, Miguel Delaney and David Ornstein.